Hey, welcome back, everybody, to the Mastering Rod Building Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Faulkner, and I love recording all these episodes, but I'm actually really excited today because I don't get to. Today's guest is a rock star by any definition, and one of the hottest names and sort of hottest career paths in professional angling, and that is none other than the pride of Grand Rapids High School and the Montevallo Fishing Falcons, and also now 2025 Elite Series angler Easton Fothergill. Welcome to the Mastering Rod Building Podcast, Easton.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
No, I'm delighted to have you. I've really been looking forward to this conversation for a host of reasons, and I'll get into that. But in the event you've been living under a rock for the last 2 or 3 years, and the name Easton Fothergill doesn't mean anything to you, first of all, I'd say you haven't been paying attention to tournament angling at all, if that's the case. But Easton, as I said, fished in high school. I get young kids all the time that are asking me about what it is to fish in high school and all this kind of stuff. So very cool. You fished at your high school in Grand Rapids. You also then went on to fish at one of the top, arguably the top program in the country in terms of national championships in the last 4 or 5 years, Montevallo. Went on to fish the Opens last year. In your first year as a rookie, your accomplishments in that space are almost like too much to mention. You had 2 wins. You won Elite Qualifier Angler of the Year, edging out Cody Meyer, who was someone who you met when you were a kid and like look up to as an angler, right? And he's like close to 400,000 in earnings career to date in one season. He's already weighed more like 350 pounds, 380 pounds of bass or something. Just a remarkable launch out of the what a way to start a career. And many people think you're in the hunt to be Elite Series Angler of the Year, Rookie of the Year 2025, maybe Angler of the Year. So, really a pleasure to have you, and so many things that we want to talk about. But and I'm delighted. I should also mention that we added you, one of our 2 new anglers this year, as a Fuji and a Toy Tools sponsored pro on the Elite Series. So thank you for that. For those of you who may be watching on YouTube, he's wearing a really good looking hat right now. It says Fuji Rod Components. But you're fun because the topic today, anybody you ask is going to say you're one of the elite anglers out there. And I don't mean elite like the Elite Series. I mean one of the best in the world with forward facing sonar, and have really adopted this technology and figured it out and used it to tremendous advantage. But you're also a rod builder, right? And so it's interesting. I have spent hours and hours talking to people about forward facing sonar, and I've heard happy people and unhappy people. I've heard people talk about how it's going to decimate fisheries, and I've heard people talk about how it's teaching us a remarkable amount of information on bass behavior that we thought we had figured out and we knew, and now we're learning these fish aren't the fish that we thought they were. There's fish in the places we thought there were, and there are fish that are behaving like we thought they were, but there's these whole other offshore populations of fish that are relating to bait that aren't the cover ambush predators we thought they were. And so, look, to be clear, my interest in today has nothing to do um, with the technology and what the stance of the major bass tours should be on it, and whether it's an advantage or a disadvantage or anything else for younger anglers, right? I've heard all these arguments and I have a perspective on it, which is probably accurately reflected by the fact that I'm having you as a guest. But I'm really excited to learn what you've learned about the tackle and how you think about the right rods and lines and reels and setup and everything as a forward facing sonar angler. So, with that as the kind of big intro, I always ask my guests the same couple of questions. So even with your professional qualifications, you're not exempt. How did you get into fishing in the first place?
How I got into fishing, my dad is super heavy into tournament fishing. He got
Oh,
me into
really?
it very
What's
young
his
age.
name?
Gordon Fothergill.
Gordon Fothergill. Okay, and is he a professional tournament fisherman also, or?
No, he's not. He thought about going the professional route, trying to do it, but then, I came along and kind of hindered those plans. So
Yeah,
then he
yeah.
decided to take it local. And yeah, we just fished all kinds of local stuff as I was growing up. And, as I got older and was able to spend more time in the boat, we kind of branched out and did more statewide and also,
hmm
upper Midwest tournaments. So it was a lot of fun. And he's definitely the reason why I got so heavy into tournament fishing.
Well, he did his work well because you've hit the ground running among the most competitive anglers in the world. It's really impressive. Talk to me about like how you got into rod building, and it's really interesting to me how many of the anglers that are really good anglers. We've seen a number of them now over the years. Kyle Welter is a former his one angler of the year on the MLF tour. He's one angler of the year on the Elite Series tour. He's a rod builder, right? And it, not as his vocation, but just as a way to tune tackle and make it what he wants it to be. I know several really good inshore guides in the Gulf Coast area, who happen, Bobby Abriscato, Patrick Garmison, Richard Rutland, some of these guys, awesome guides. And part of what they do that makes them so successful is they build their own rods and all that kind of stuff. So how did you get into rod building in the first place?
So when I was kind of climbing the ranks and fishing, I got to Montevallo here, and I realized really quickly that you got to find every advantage you can possibly find in tournament fishing.
Yep.
It comes to tackle, that comes to your equipment, everything. And what rod building does is it allows you to have full customization. Everything is exactly how you want it.
Yep.
And I'm a tinker with all my tackle. Everything
Yep.
you can go on my boat, my tackle, everything's perfect. That's just the way I'm wired. And I really think that does give me a big advantage when I'm on the water trying to compete against the top pros in fishing.
Oh, and what an
Everything's exactly
advantage
how I
when you
want it.
partner with sponsors and try to design equipment and everything. Like, no offense to anyone who doesn't build, but it teaches you, whether you want to learn or not, a lot about how fishing rods work, what makes them work and not work, and the variables you can tweak, whether it's in the blank, whether it's in the guides, whether it's in how the rod is assembled, length, handle length, whatever it is. I mean, it does give you the ability to customize and tweak and dial in, that I think's got to make you a better partner with some of your sponsors and everything too, as you look to design rods that are going to work for other anglers, right?
Absolutely, yeah, and yeah, there's nothing I can't say anything more about that. How important it is to me to have full customization with everything that I do on the water. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a really big deal for me for sure.
Well, it's clearly working, right? Nobody can argue with the results. So I'm also fascinated, and this isn't really the topic of the podcast or anything, but a guy you fished with once upon a time who also went to Montevallo, Jack Barron, right? He's from Annapolis, Maryland, and is an excellent angler. Maybe he's a little too focused on swim baits and glide baits, and is a little difficult to get off of those when something else is working. But there are worse problems to have than this. He's a very good angler. And then you got you coming from Grand Rapids in Minnesota. Like, how did you find your way to the University of Montevallo? Was it this outdoor scholars program, or how did that? I'm fascinated by that journey. Before we dive into the forward facing sonar stuff, how did you get from Grand Rapids to Montevallo?
The outdoor scholars program at Montevallo was definitely part of it, but the biggest thing was, in Minnesota, you have only so many lakes and rivers and stuff like that. There's no, I mean, all I had was the Mississippi River, which is a lot of smallmouth
Right.
and some largemouth, but there's no tidal fisheries, there's no like, the TVA system, there's nothing like
Right.
that. So I knew if I ever wanted to pursue a living in fishing professionally, that I would have to learn those types of fisheries. And that's what drew me to Alabama was, I have access to lakes with herring, I have the Coosa River here, spotted bass fishing,
Yeah.
and we're not far from, other types of lakes like Seminole and that sort of thing. There's really every, aside from tidal fishing, within 2 hours of Montevallo here, that you have access to every kind of lake there is.
I'd
And so
never thought of that before. I've lived in Alabama for 13 years, and that's the first time I've really thought about it that way. But yeah, strategically, it's like center of the bullseye for the tournament
Mhm.
circuit, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what drew me here. And it just so happened that Montevallo was coming up as one of the, top scholarships programs. One of the biggest programs in college fishing was Montevallo at the time. So,
Oh
it was a
yeah.
no-brainer for me to go to Montevallo.
Well, and Auburn is another elite program, and it's interesting they're both located in Alabama, right? So
Right,
maybe
right.
there's something to these home waters and where guys are and gals are getting to practice and fish. It's interesting. If you don't know anything about the Outdoor Scholars Program, this is such a cool program. Again, I wish there had been a program like this around when I was a kid. But it is literally a program that was founded, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 years ago, and it's growing rapidly, and it's become a really big. I mean, several hundred kids in the program now, and it's young men and women from all around the country that intend to make a living in the outdoor industry, whether it's in hunting and fishing, or forestry, or park management, or wildlife management, or fisheries biology, or be a tournament, angler or whatever. And William Crawford is the department head, kind of started it, and Steve Long's the right hand man. And I've found that out found out about it because I found my marketing guy Jack Barron when I needed to go find a marketing guy that fit the modern social media and fishing generation, and Jack's perfect and has been great. And but it really is a remarkable program that and you guys compete at the highest level. But anyway, that's fascinating. So let's get into the forward facing sonar. So when did you first start fishing this? I mean, this was kind of becoming early versions of this were kind of available when you were in college or maybe even late high school. Were you aware of it and sort of using it as early as then? Or talk to me about your personal journey with this, because obviously you're one of the best in the world at fishing this way. And because it's a new technology, you're at no disadvantage being a relatively young angler. In fact, I think it arguably could be an advantage that my kids are much more comfortable with technology than I am, right? And you see that some in the adoption rate of this with professionals of different age. But tell me how you got into it when you were first introduced to it, and how did you get so good at it? I guess, for lack of a better description.
Yeah, so I actually got it the summer after I graduated high school. It was the summer of 2020 is when
Okay.
I first got forward-facing sonar, and I can still
Okay.
remember taking it on the local lake in Grand Rapids, myself and my dad, and we were just astonished immediately at what it showed us. Like we were crappie fishing with it, and in one day we learned so much about crappies that we didn't know. We were both just amazed.
Right.
And I still remember myself and my dad talking about how this is going to change bass fishing. It's going to do it quick. And, I made the decision that day, like, I need to get good at this to stay ahead of the game. And yeah, it was just something that I knew right away that I was going to have to devote a lot of time to really get good at.
Hmm.
And it was, ever since then, I've made sure that, I'm going to stay ahead of the curve on this. Like, it's something I have to do. And, it's countless hours on the water, playing with it. And, it's, people say it, they master it, but it's that's like saying you mastered fishing when you say you mastered
Right.
forward-facing sonar. It's
As soon
impossible.
as you
You can't
say
do
that,
it.
you're going to get humbled, right? Yeah.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
It's just another tool is all it is. People
Yeah.
say that, it's the cheater box, it's all that, but I promise you there's a lot more fish that I don't catch with that thing than I do catch. So
And
it's
that's a danger in a time limited tournament, right? Like
oh
seeing those fish that will not cooperate that you cannot get to bite, you might be spending all kinds of valuable daylight or, tournament time on those fish that if you hadn't known they were there, you would have moved on, right? So, it's interesting. I've heard, and I know there's people out there listening who are coming into this conversation loaded and have an opinion about it. And you said the cheat box, and I wasn't going to bring it up, but since you said that, I'll talk about it. The only thing that I'll say about that is um, it's available to everybody, and anybody can use it within the rules of the tournament. So how is it cheating if it's available to everybody, right? And I've talked to some, and I won't name any names, but I'll talk to some friends who are very experienced long-term Elite Series anglers or long-term tournament anglers, and they're saying it's changed everything. It's totally taken the skill out of. If you don't believe me, look at how many young people are winning events, right? And heck, they might point at you and say, and think about this. This is remarkable. You've fished 10 professional tournaments, including one classic, and you've been in the money 8 times. And you finished first twice. You got three top tens, seven top 20s. Like you're in contention every event you've ever been in. So, number one, that's never just one technique or one thing. We fish way too many lakes with way too many. The other thing is, I think about the guys who were your age when I was kind of your age and they were the new guys in the sport. They had full-time jobs and they were maybe fishing Wednesday night tournaments or local tournaments and going out and fishing some regional tournaments. And then they got the backing, they got the confidence, whatever it was, and they decided to make a go of it and try one season on, the Bassmaster series before the elites. And maybe they were good enough and they made it. But I'd also say you look at someone like you fished all these tournaments in high school on diverse bodies of water. You fished in an elite level for 4 years at Montevallo. Like when you hit your rookie season, you're not a rookie by the definition of the way these guys were rookies, right? So it's very easy, I think, to look at it and call it a cheat box. I don't think it's a cheat box. And in terms of the only valid concerns I've had is like, what is the impact on crappie populations, striper populations, some recreational, fisheries and things. And I understand that, but if that's a problem. Then we need new rules, right? The technology,
Mhm.
this toothpaste never going back in the tube. Technology is amoral, as Mr. Nobel, who invented dynamite, said, right, and got the Nobel Peace Prize named after him. And by amoral, I mean not immoral, but it doesn't feel one way or the other. It's whether you use it morally or immorally that it's good or evil, right? So, for me, I have no interest in any of that argument. If we need to revise turn rules or limits and fishing seasons or whatever, then that's what we ought to
Mhm.
do. But anybody who thinks this stuff's going away, I think it's wishful thinking, right? And in fact, it's growing. I'm a big saltwater angler, and we're seeing more and more of it for marlin and sailfish and billfish and like. You mentioned having it since high school. So, as someone who's relatively ignorant of forward-facing sonar, we've all heard of it, we've all talked about it. Let's talk through it just a little bit and what it is and how you use it without disclosing any proprietary secrets because it's changed in just the time that you've been using it. So when you
Mhm.
got it right out of high school and the unit you have on your boat right now are very different animals. And the ability to sort of spotlight and do some of these different things. So just at a real high level, talk me through how you use this and what it does and doesn't do and a little bit of that history just in your time since you got your first taste of this technology, the kind of thing you're using as a high level professional now, if you don't mind.
Right. So like I said earlier, it's just another tool, right? It's just
Right.
like my Humber 360. It's just another
Or your
tool. A
trolling
lot of
motor.
people,
Yeah, or
right.
your yeah, right.
Exactly. So a lot of people, when they think of it, they're, oh, I'm in the middle of the lake chasing these fish that, that's the first thing that everyone thinks about with forward-facing sonar. And the vast majority of the time, that's not what I'm doing. I'm fishing on the
Right.
bank just like everyone else. But what
Okay.
that thing tells me is, it tells me if there's bait in the area, if there's good grass, or it'll show me this good laydown over here that's got a lot of good water on it. It's
Right.
just it's something like that that just gives me all kinds of information like I said, if I'm fishing grass, it tells me where the thickest, tallest grass is, which will likely hold the bass,
Hmm.
or it'll tell me if there's bait in the area, or it's just something that gives me so much more information. A lot of times I'm actually not picking off individual fish. It's just telling me where, I should be positioning myself to likely, be in front of a good population of bass, is the best way to describe it. But, it does allow you to chase those suspended roaming fish, yes. But there's a lot of times when I'm not doing that. Like I said, I'm on the bank using it to my ability.
Okay. And it's my understanding, and I've seen some footage that Jack had, and it may have even been you and Jack and DK and Cal, and guys that were on Gunnersville back in
Right.
November.
Yep. Yep.
Fascinating moment, and Jack captured some of this on his phone for me, where a paddlefish swims through, which they have on Gunnersville, and it looks exactly like a paddlefish. So the technology has gotten good enough. Are you able to discern when you're pulling up on a laydown or you're pulling up on these weeds? Are you able to discern largemouth and smallmouth or bass from other species and things like that? Or does that subject to conditions or
It's it's all subject to the lake, and it's like a drum versus a bass. I can tell a difference. Sometimes a
okay,
catfish and a
just that
bass.
broad back and
Yes.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah,
Yep. When they're smaller, it's a lot harder, but a big bass versus a big drum, the difference is pretty obvious. But
yeah.
it's a lot of times the reaction, how they react to my bait is what tells me if they're a bass or not. A
Hmm.
drum reacts different than a bass. A catfish reacts different than a bass. So a lot of times I'll see a blob and I'll throw my bait and I'm looking at how that fish reacts to my bait. And that's what tells me if it's a bass or not most of the time.
Yeah. Interesting. That's fascinating stuff, man. Have you seen the Loch Ness Monster, or has this changed your opinion on those kind of phenomenon at all? Have you seen anything curious you can't explain? I'm just kidding.
I have not. A paddlefish is the closest thing I've seen to that.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a wild looking fish, right? If
It
you've
is,
never seen
yeah,
one
we
before. But
caught a great big one at Cherokee actually, and
oh, would you catch it
we we snagged it, but
on purpose or on accident? Wait,
it
don't
was on
answer that
purpose.
question if it's not legal in that state. I don't know, but yeah,
No, it was
I'll
in season, so it was legal, but it was they're just as crazy in person as they look like on the screen. I can promise you that.
I used to live in Tennessee, and they would target them for snagging under some of the
Mhm.
TVA dams, at certain times of the year there. And I was actually there trout fishing. And one Saturday morning, I'm fishing the Caney Fork River, which is about an hour east of Nashville. And all of a sudden, I look downriver, and it's first light. It's kind of foggy on the river, and I see this fin. I can see the dorsal fin, what I perceive to be a dorsal fin, and a tail fin coming up the river right at me. And I'm standing in like a shin deep riffle, right? And it's just getting to be first light. And I'm like, as someone who fishes off the beach and land-based shark fishes and everything, my head immediately goes shark. And I'm like, dude, this is 58-degree water out of this tailwater. It's miles and miles too far even from a bull shark to get here, right? This waterway does not connect directly to the Mississippi or any other way. So like there's a part of me that knows it's not a shark, but I'm like, what is this thing? And it just comes swimming up, swimming up, swimming up river, right? In relatively strong current. And it's just cruising up to where its back's coming out of the water. And here it is, and it is this absolute pale white, like 4 foot long paddlefish, and I'd never seen one before. And I was like, what in the world? And I thought maybe it's sick because it's so pale, you know? And it literally swims within a foot of me. And it's almost like completely blind that I'm there, doesn't see me, like catatonic, and it's just cruising. So I decide I'm gonna reach down and grab it. So right as it passes me, I reach down and try to grab it by the tail, and I swear to you, it nearly ripped my shoulder out of socket. I mean, that thing took off like lightning when I grabbed it, and I've never forgotten the power in that fish. I can't imagine trying to bring one in on bass gear, and they're but I'm told they're delicious. There's people who uh go out of their way to find them and take great care of them and eat them and everything else. So I guess, to each their own, but that's not something I've been aware of. But if you Google paddlefish and you look at it, it has a very distinctive set of fins on its body and a very distinctive tail shape. And it's with this unit that you guys were using, you could tell it was a paddlefish, and
Hmm.
it was not that close. It was 30 plus yards away. I was just blown away.
Yeah, it's a crazy tool, and those paddlefish, some of them are so big, like they just
Yeah.
glow on your screen, and you can fully see their big nose and stuff like that.
Oh
It's
yeah.
it's really cool for sure.
I would have to throw at one, even if I was in a tournament, I think. I mean, I've never been, couldn't even come close to qualifying for the Elite Series, much less winning an event. But if I'm out in the boat and I see a fish that big, I'm pretty sure I'm throwing everything in the box at it to see if I can get it to eat. But I think they're like filter feeders or something. I don't know
Yeah,
that they
they
even
are.
eat bait fish, but yeah.
Yeah.
So talk to me. You've obviously learned so much about using this equipment. Or the forward-facing sonar technology as a tool. Talk to me about the rods and the reels and the baits. So obviously that's changed a lot of things. Like if I was brand new out in your boat today, or for our audience who's dialing in because they want to hear about this, if someone comes to them and says, "Hey, I need a rod for forward-facing sonar," if they're a custom rod builder, like how are you talk to me about this? How are you thinking about this in terms of weight and length and power? It seems like a lot of guys using spinning versus casting. Like, walk me through some of that. What do we need to know that we don't know about how to gear up for this technique?
So we can talk about this for hours, but where
That's
my
why we're
setup
here, my friend.
my setup all depends. It all starts with what hook I'm using.
Hmm,
That I really haven't heard anyone else describe it this way, but if you're using a light wire hook, I'm not talking about size of the hook, the gauge of the hook.
right.
If I'm using a light wire, that entail I'm using a light rod, but if I use a heavy
Okay.
wire hook, the rod's going to be heavier. So,
Okay.
and, the hook I use all depends on what bait I'm throwing. So
Right.
it all depends on the hook. If I'm using a light hook, it'll be a shorter, lighter, almost. We'll just talk. I'm using a 3-inch minnow. We'll say with a 3-inch minnow,
I was gonna
I
say,
tend
and
to
this
use
is a very popular presentation, and this is a way this technology excels. Like
right.
to throw a jig and minnow or hover stroll and minnow or whatever. That's not all this tool and technique allows you to do, but that's a lot of it, and that's one
Mhm.
of the ones that's been an eye opener and people can be very effective with. You've been very effective with. So awesome category, 3-inch minnow. Talk to me about the rig. You're going with the spinning rod since that's a light wire hook.
Yep.
And but there's
With
also, as I understand it, and I've not done this, part of it is there's a real skill to being able to cast the right distance. Just because you can see that fish and your tool is telling him, your gear is telling him you where that fish is, that you still got to hit him, right? And
Mhm.
there's some geometry with how far you may have to cast beyond them versus how long you're going to let it sink. Like so, this ability to practice and know a distance, know how to make a 40-foot cast, 50-foot cast, 20-foot cast. My understanding is that's critical. And again, I've not done it. Is that true? And how does
That
that
is
inform, like on this spinning rod for a 3-inch minnow, does that change the way you build the rod, the length of it, the reel, the line? Talk to
it,
me about that.
it definitely does. So when I first started doing this, my back home, it's in super clear water. It's
Right.
crucial to get your bait way far away from the boat. So when I
Sure.
got down here and started doing it, I was like, okay, I'm going to use my 7'6" medium light, and I started casting overhand like I always do at home. Getting my bait way out there on these fish. And as time has progressed, this is my fifth year really doing this technique. My rods I found have gotten shorter and shorter and shorter. Because what I found was casting overhand, it's when you get good at it, great. But all of a sudden you get a windy day, all of a sudden your bait starts blowing all over the place and you can't hit
Right.
that fish with one cast.
Right.
So what I've learned is you use a shorter rod so you can cast underhand without your bait hitting the water. And you keep that bait low to the water and you can get a streamlined cast no matter the conditions.
Ah.
And that's the
And then
biggest reason
just
why.
practice to get your distance.
Right, right. But once you
And are
once
you
you
like
get good at
practicing on
casting
land with
underhand,
known distance markers, or are you just able to practice based on what you're seeing on the screen? Or how do you get good at nailing on the first try a 30-foot cast versus a 50-foot cast?
it's all time on the water. You got to envision,
Okay.
20 feet on your screen is a boat length, right? In most
Right.
cases with a bass
Right.
boat. So you just got to
Right.
envision that.
Hmm.
And, you get to the point where, okay, a fish is at 50 feet. I can do it in my eyes closed almost. Like
Sure.
it's muscle memory at this point. I've done it so
Right.
much. But like I said, it's underhand. So then any conditions you have, you can hit that fish on one cast, like I said. So we'll go back to the 3-inch minnow. That's going to be a
And
medium wire hook normally.
okay. Okay.
So it'll most likely be a 7 foot medium for a
Seven
minnow.
foot. Okay.
That's
Okay.
that's that's kind of what I've come to the conclusion to. But then you go to a bigger minnow, we'll go 5, 6, 7, 8 inches. A pretty big minnow. I'm gonna need a little bit heavier rod and like a medium heavy to cast that
Yeah.
minnow out. And since I have that heavier rod, I also need a heavier hook
Right.
to offset that heavier rod because you need that heavy rod with the backbone to get that bait accurately out there. If you use like a medium light, for example, you cast that big minnow out there, you just feel like you're lobbing it out there, and it's just not
Yeah.
accurate.
Right.
So,
That's one of the things, it's kind of a secret. And again, I don't envy you Elite Series guys keeping any secrets because you're trying to make a living. And I
mhm.
don't think people understand how competitive this tournament trail is and how good all these anglers are. Like, it takes so much to win one event on the Elite Series, right? Any event, anywhere, anytime. I don't care who you are. You have to perform at such a high level, execute so flawlessly across all the days, across every hour of every
4 days
day. Like
straight. Yeah,
literally, a fish can cost you fishing Sunday or not. It can cost you the trophy or not, obviously, right? It's so competitive. Um, but you know, the I've totally lost my train of thought. Erase this out. I had a point. Sorry. Now I got to think
you're
what it
good.
was. We were talking about you said something that triggered me when you're talking about casting the distance in 7 feet versus one of the things I don't think people understand, and I didn't understand until I started hanging out with Jack and he started teaching me a little bit about this. I just assumed it was always a 3-inch minnow and that was the only technique people are doing. That's not the case. It's
Not the
not
case.
just
Yeah.
that class of bait. And you mentioned the big minnows. If you're paying attention, kids, big minnows are a thing. Like just because someone catches them on a jig minnow, if they don't tell you what size minnow it is, you're assuming it's 3 inches. That doesn't mean that's what they're throwing, right? Um,
Exactly.
okay, so what about line setup? Have you developed an opinion on braid, fluoro, mono combination of a braid to a leader, or what have you learned in your experience about that, or does that change?
I've played with this a lot, and I've kind of set on one conclusion. I've been using an 8 pound braid as of late, and that just allows you to get that bait, out there accurately. You get castability with that 8 pound braid.
Right?
Um, And I've learned that 8 pound braid is a lot stronger than a lot of people give it credit for.
Yeah.
I put baits in places I really shouldn't be with 8 pound, and I have no issues.
Well, it's
And
interesting because the pound rating on these PE lines, which are a textile, right, is completely
Mhm.
arbitrary, right? It's
Right.
really the PE and number of fibers, and 8 pound is going to break it with premium lines at least like 16, 15, 16, some of them as high as 20, 24, right? And so
Yep.
it's very arbitrary what, the pound test, but that's how they had to label these things when it first started coming from Japan and when we first started manufacturing it, because that's all people understood was pound test. And if you said PE1, people would be like, what? And so
Yeah,
they labeled it. But I agree, but 8 pounds pretty small. So you'd even be throwing 8 pound on a bigger minnow.
absolutely. I've settled on 8 pound for basically any minnow. Basically, really any spinning rod setup I do is 8 pound test braid.
Interesting. Interesting.
So
So you're gonna, if I'm hearing you right, you're picking the bait you're gonna use, and based on that hook, that's gonna determine whether you're going with the lighter action rod and a 7 foot length, or whether you're gonna go with something a little beefier. But you're staying with the 8 pound braid. So that are you running fluoro leader? And again, you don't have
I
to
am
tell
running
too
a
many secrets, but okay.
Yep, I am running a floor leader, and what I do with that, it's normally a 12 pound. I've played with the size. The 12 pound, you still get the bait action, but
Hmm.
I get hardly any breakoffs with a 12 pound. I played with
Yeah,
8 and 10 because I thought, that'd be a little bit, I'd get more bites and better action, but I've really studied it, and I still get the action with 12 pound, and you get some teeth rubbing. You get, they choke that bait, your line's rubbing against their teeth.
absolutely.
You get a lot of abrasion resistance with that 12 pound, and
Sure.
you're really not going to break them off. I mean, you still have to retie sometimes, but with that 12 pound, you're not going to break them off.
Is the line and leader you favor a secret, or is it somebody that's a sponsor that we can mention, or would you rather keep it to yourself?
It's I'm still playing with it, honestly. I'm
Oh,
changing it up
okay.
daily. But that's the
Okay.
sizes, no matter what really brand
Okay.
company, that's the
Okay.
size that I've been using. It doesn't seem to matter the brand, but and another thing I do with this is I use a really short fluorocarbon leader, about a foot length, foot
You
and a
just
half.
took the next question out of my mouth. Okay, so this is so fascinating. This is another thing I've learned from some of you guys this year. Not always, like if I'm throwing a top water or there's certain surf applications, I still like straight mono, right? And there's applications where I'll run straight fluoro. But I mean, 90% of the time, I'm going to run a braid to a fluoro, right? And I'm starting to think I've been using way too long a leader because I will often
Well,
use a rod length. And you got, so even in clear water, you're going with that shorter leader?
Well, this is if I'm casting and winding a bait like I do it for smallmouth all the time, I'm still using that 6 foot leader, a really long leader, because a lot of
Okay.
times those fish will be tracking your bait for quite some time. And that's when
Okay.
I think the line, you don't want them to see that braid at all. But
Right.
if I'm targeting an individual fish with my sonar, I don't want that guide going through my eyes because it's all about accuracy with that. And I think that really can alter the trajectory of your
It
bait.
can. Yep.
So that's the reason why I've gone to the short leader. That's another thing. It's gotten shorter and shorter over time.
And
And
isn't that interesting? Okay.
I've looked at so many fish on my sonar, and I don't think when you're targeting one directly with your sonar, I don't think it's as crucial to have that long of a leader. I really don't.
Wow. And what a luxury to have the knot outside the tip top at all times, right? It just takes a whole lot of wear and, like you said, casting accuracy and variation out of it. Do you have you come to favor any particular knot for your braid to fluoro join?
I use a what's it called? It's not an FG. I am against an FG knot.
All right, let's
Um,
talk about that. I'm fascinated by because I know you've set the hook on more fish and cast more fish in any month than I will in the entire year. So I trust your opinion based on time on the water. You've gone away for talk to me about the FG. Takes too long to tie. You had
it,
failures. What?
I think there's a lot of guys that tell me, if as long as you prepare them all the night before, you're good to go because they do take a long time,
That's not always practical though.
20, 30 seconds. But I've just had a couple key times where it comes unraveled on me and it's really costed me just, once or twice. And, you have that happen it could be, the winning fish at some point in your career. So
Right.
that's just something that I've completely eliminated from my
Apparently,
game.
any fish could possibly be the winning fish in any tournament you fish because you're always in the top 10.
I don't know about that,
Well,
but
so what's the knot that you are using?
uh, I'm drawing a blank. It's like the next popular knot.
Not a uni, not a PR
It's not
knot,
uni. It's not uni to
not a
uni.
crazy Alberto.
Crazy Alberto. That's it.
Yeah, okay. I was gonna say, hey, when you couldn't think of the name, I was like, I wonder if he's thinking Crazy Alberto because that's a
It's
weird
still
name for a
one. You
knot.
take the fluoro, you make a loop, you go through the loop,
Yep,
5 wraps down, 5 wraps back up, back through
yep,
the loop
yep.
opposite direction.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah.
knot I
Okay,
do.
yeah.
So,
Interesting.
it's still the same idea of an FG knot. It just seems more fail-proof to me at least.
Okay.
And it takes at least half the time. So
It's interesting. I use the FG and also a PR bobbin knot all the time in saltwater. And my son, who's now 21, when he was in about seventh or eighth grade, his science fair project was we did a project where we just did every knot we could find to join braid
I did the
and then
same
it was a
science
mono
project.
because
This was
and then
funny.
we broke them right and measured it and it was a little unscientific in terms I didn't have the IGFA testing machine right like I home rigged a thing with a big old saltwater shark reel and like a spring scale that had a stopper and but it worked and it was really interesting one of the things about the homemade machine was I couldn't break anything. We're talking about how strong braid is to the rating. We ended up having to go down to like 20-pound braid and 20-pound leader because I couldn't break anything stronger than that. Like this rig I built wasn't strong enough to do it. So one of the fascinating things was different knots were stronger on lighter lines than on heavier lines, right? And so and I've since gotten to play on some machines and send some knots in to be tested, but I'm not sure an FG or a PR is, which is in heavy land, like land-based shark fishing gear or something like this, it's the strongest bar none. It's not even close compared to like a Unity Uni or a Crazy Alberto or Albright or any of these knots. But in the lighter lines, we did not find that to be true. And it was a knot that's simpler even than than Alberto, called a Red Phillips knot, that proves strongest at 20 to 20 and lighter, which was really interesting. But so I believe you when you say that. I mean, and again, I've had some pretty smart guys tell me the best knot is the one you can tie in combat conditions reliably and you believe in, right? And it works for you. So um, that's
That's what it's all
interesting.
about, just having confidence. So,
I'm trying. It is. It matters, right? And it's
oh,
just one less
absolutely.
variable, right? You focus on what you control and don't worry about that stuff. Your mind's just quiet about that stuff. So you
Exactly.
mentioned spinning setups. So what have you come to have an opinion about size of reel for the drag and the line twist and the casting distance and all this, or is it just kind of whatever you're comfortable with?
Um, it's honestly whatever you're comfortable with. The biggest thing for me is having a good drag system.
Okay.
That's, when you're fighting these fish, a lot of times it's on, a decently light line and, they'll take big runs on you and all that. It's drag is by far the most important thing to me.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, it's, line organization on your reel is also important, but drag is definitely number one for me for sure.
How often are you changing lines? Are you changing lines every tournament or every day or like with this lighter stuff? How often do you recommend people? Are you inspecting it? And if it's fine, you go with it. If you see nicks, you replace it, or how have you learned to think about that?
My braid, I tend to leave on my reels for quite some time.
Okay.
But before a tournament, I'm changing my leaders before
Oh,
every
sure.
tournament,
Yeah.
no matter the situation. That's just a peace of mind thing. I'm having all new leaders every night before a tournament, so
Sure.
that's
Yeah.
kind of how I roll. All my bait casters and stuff, my fluorocarbon, I change that pretty regularly. But I think braid has a lot better, it has a lot better shelf life, I guess you could say.
Sure. Yeah. Well, you mentioned the casting. So we've talked about, maybe with a fine or a medium wire hook and maybe a slightly heavier hook for a bigger minnow. When are the applications, excuse me, where you are using a casting rig for this forward facing stuff?
There's times so in the winter they get pretty heavy on shad and the bass do, and
Yeah,
that's what makes us throw these minnows, right? We're imitating shad a lot of times, sometimes some
right,
gizzard,
right.
that's just another kind of shad. But in the summertime, they get a lot more on crawfish on a lot of lakes and stuff, and that's when I'll start throwing jigs at these fish, and that's when I'll throw the bait casters. So
Okay. And are you still running 8-pound braid or are you going to a heavier braid on that kind of a setup?
on the jigs, I'm using straight fluorocarbon. I'm pretty beefy with my jigs, so I use
Okay.
20 pound a lot, and
Okay.
I'm not playing nice with them with a jig. I jack them, and I get them in
Yeah.
the boat with a jig. So
Well,
it's
I,
not the little like fancy little fairy wand stuff with a jig. It's
right.
you're
Yeah.
getting
Yeah.
me.
But do you favor a shorter rod when you're targeting specific fish on the sonar, even though it's a casting setup like this? Or are you using
It's
longer lengths, more traditional jig lengths, or how do you think about the rod specifically?
with a jig. I'm slightly longer just so you can the more length you have on your hook set, the more power
Sure.
you have on your hook set.
Right.
So
Just
it
leverage. Yeah.
leverage up. It's more of a 7.2, 7.3 mostly for my
Okay.
jig. Is kind of my favorite length.
Okay. And are you able to? I know we have so many baits these days, especially with the jig head minnow kind of rigs that are supposed to be sonar opaque and you can see them and all that kind of stuff. Are you able to see a chunky bait like a jig out there on your? Are you
Oh
able to
yeah,
see your bait? Yeah.
it glows like a light bulb. A jig
Oh, I
does.
bet. Yeah.
Those smaller 3-inch minnows, sometimes you got to have your settings pretty dialed in to see that, and
Right.
in some lakes. But a jig, it's no problem.
Oh, awesome. So you say on some lakes you're having to change your settings on every different lake or every different day and body of water to get the sensitivity you're wanting on these things, huh?
Yep. No. So let's see. Like a Great Lake, for example, that water is pristine. There's hardly anything in the water.
Right.
That's where you get your best image. But you go somewhere like a for example, Lake Eufaula, Oklahoma,
Yep.
it's a mud pit pretty much, and there's all kinds of
Right.
sediment in the water and all that.
Don't get mad, Oklahoma. It's a mud pit full of big bass, and we love fishing there. And he's had good
So it's
results there. He won
I
there.
had a
He's
good time
happy.
there.
He's not
There's no
dogging
hate
on it.
on that lake.
He's just observing a clarity difference that's factual. Right? Yeah. We'll try to keep the Okies from getting on you, man.
But no, that's just one example of a lake that's got sediment in the water, so you got to tweak your settings a little bit just to.
Really to get the contrast or whatever it is, so you can get the resolution you want. Yeah.
Yep, and that obviously varies every lake we go to.
Yeah, you mentioned that you really like to be able to dial the variables and sort of dial everything in for the maximum competitive advantage. From just a general rod building standpoint, any other things you tweaking handle links, you getting picky with guide trains, like any other pointers you could give people or the rod builders that are looking to optimize performance and their advantages or anything you've learned?
I guess for a minnow setup, I've learned I really like a short handle. I think if you have a
Really?
long handle, that it kind of gets in the way when you're doing your shaking action. You're
Okay.
shaking. I shake underhand for the most part. A lot of guys like to
Okay.
shake overhand, and I'm pretty sure when you do that, the handle length wouldn't matter as much. But when I shake underhand, I find if you have a long handle, it kind of gets in the way of your action. So I think a short handle for your minnow is what I prefer. Again, it's all about what you prefer.
See, that's interesting because you're not a short guy, right? I would have thought if you were tweaking, you'd have gone longer handle. That's interesting, but it just fishes for you better when you go shorter for that underhand shaking technique.
I just feel like I have more control over my bait with a short handle and a short rod. I think if I have a long setup, I can't cast accuracy like I was saying, and I also feel like I'm overworking the bait at times if I have a long rod. So that's
Interesting.
yeah. But I mean, for example, if you're flipping, I want a long handle to put it in my chest or my rib cage, and I'm jacking them with that handle. So
Right.
it all depends on the technique and just finding that sweet spot, I guess.
Yeah, well, you've certainly found it because you've had an awful lot of success. What have you? I read these articles I'm so fascinated by, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier in the podcast, but there's kind of this emerging body of information about bass where we would have sort of said, hey, these are shoreline based, structure based ambush predators, and we can predict where they're going to be. And those bass are there.
Hmm.
But we found that there's these other bass too, right? Like that, even largemouth, it's not a big stretch for someone to say, oh, there's these spotted bass schooling out suspended over these deep humps and deep water or smallmouth or schooling like, but this largemouth too, right? And other species. Like, what would you say is the most surprising thing you've learned about bass behavior since using this technology?
How much, Definitely the most surprising thing to me is how much water they cover.
Yeah,
When a bass is suspending, for the most part, they are moving. And I mean
really? Okay, so they're not just
moving,
sitting out
moving.
there. Yeah.
No. Yeah. So what I've come to learn is when a bass isn't on structure, he's out there for a reason. He's hunting for bait.
Okay.
Um, and if a bass isn't hunting, he's going to be around a piece of structure somewhere, and he doesn't feel comfortable in the open water. I guess is what I'm getting at. He's out there for
Yeah.
a reason. So
Yeah.
if he's not hunting, he's going to be kind of corralled up in a brush pile or next to a stump or something like that. But it's just amazing to me. These fish are out here swimming, hunting for shad or whatever they're hunting for out in the open water. They're swimming 2, 3, 4 miles an hour. Like, I mean, hauling out
They
there.
are moving. Yeah, that's not
Yeah.
slow. Yeah, that's like you'd have to be a pretty good paddler to keep up with them in a kayak
Yeah.
for
No,
reference
no.
people, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
Wow, that's interesting. So I just assumed these were sort of stationary. I didn't realize they were moving that much.
there's, a lot of, yeah. I mean, it's amazing how fast and how much water these fish cover. There's times, there's been multiple instances where I cast at a fish and, I make a wrong cast and he feels the presence of my bait, but he didn't see it. And that fish will dive down and I think it's because, he knows something is wrong. So that fish will dive down to bottom where he feels comfortable again. And I will, if I think this is a fish that I want in a tournament, I will follow this fish. I will follow him, follow him, follow him. And sometimes I follow this fish for 2, 3, 400 yards. And finally,
Really?
this fish will feel comfortable again and he'll come back up to the surface and
And
I'll
you
catch him.
present again. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's just one instance in one scenario where that's just how much water these fish are covering. And this is just one instance with that, you would never even imagine a fish doing that without forward facing sonar.
Now, I've fished my whole life, and I would have told you there's no way a largemouth bass does that, right?
Yeah.
No way they do that. But now we know that they do, right? What's
Mhm.
your take on, a lot of people say that I have read pros like on Jay Kumar's Bass Blaster. He does an awesome job, bassblaster.com, like covering you guys and all the baits of all the tournaments and everything. And I like to read it and watch because I learn something, right? And it cost me a fortune at Tackle Warehouse because he's always scooping baits. And every once in a while, I figure out a bait that works really well for me. Next thing I know, it's in the Bass Blaster. I'm like, dang it, Jay, why are you telling everybody? But um, I've read some people say that they think they've seen fish begin to react. And you mentioned this fish sort of getting spooked for some reason and kind of going to comfort, going to ground and then coming back. Do you feel like you've seen a change in fish behavior? Are they perceiving that we're after them some new way? Do you feel like you see fish learning or reacting differently to this technology?
I have seen some fish, I guess, spook from the pinging of a forward-facing sonar. I
Really?
am starting to see it more and more, I feel like. But for example, I'm right near the Coosa River here, and
Yep.
scoping's a big deal in the winter. In the
Yeah.
last 3, 4 years, I've got
Right
pretty dialed
now, as
in.
we speak, it's they're getting it
Right.
right now. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I felt like I was pretty dialed in on, fish movement and stuff like that. But all of a sudden this year, everything's different. The places I've caught them
Mm.
the last 3, 4 years, they're not there anymore. And even the
Hmm.
shad is being different this year. So I've been racking my brain why this would happen, but I've come to the conclusion that it started last year, but for sure this year, you go out there and there's just people down the middle of the river, live scoping. Like, I mean, the word got out and this is like the new cool thing almost.
Right.
So it's got to be fishing pressure that does that, and the forward-facing sonar pressure that has changed that fish movement. And I really think the bass are adapting.
Yeah. Well, I believe you when you say it because you spend so much more time looking at fish and make a living doing it, right? It's fascinating to me. It's interesting. These are different fish, right? But nature's survival instincts are strong, right? And nature's not dumb. We fishing in the saltwater, like we target snapper and grouper and some of these things a lot. And there are areas where we fish where if you will pull out to the spot just by your numbers instead of pinging them. Now we're not using forward facing; we're just using regular kind of bottom sonar. You'll catch them, and if you ping them, you won't. And I don't. There's no explanation for it to me other than that they've associated. They've get these are public numbers. These are spots that everybody fishes. It's like the known spots on some of these lakes you guys go fish, right?
Mhm.
Like community holes or whatever you call them, right? Like you know those fish are getting hammered all the time. That's not to say they're not there. It's not to say that some people won't catch some of them, but that's fascinating. The other thing we've seen is we're having real shark problems where you can get to a spot, you can catch a fish, but it's hard to get the fish to the boat without it getting shark depredation, as the biologists call it, which means you get sharked and it eats the fish off the end of your line, which is a drag because you killed the fish and the resources lost it and you didn't put anything in the boat, right? Um, but that's much better if you turn your sonar off in a lot of the places on the northern Gulf Coast. So
Huh.
and again, sharks have perceptory, sensory, capabilities that a lot of fish don't have, with Ampullae of Lorenzini and all these different things. But it makes sense that if you subject them to the same stimulus enough and then they associate it with being negative or they have a negative experience with it, that they're going to adjust, they're going to react. Um, do you feel like, well, it's so funny you haven't been on tour long enough. It'd be really interesting to see how it's going to play out this year. We've got new rules on all the major
Mhm.
tours as it relates to the use of forward-facing sonar. Like, what's your feeling on that? Six one,
I
half
think
dozen.
what's that?
Are we six one, half dozen the other, or do you wish they were not regulating it, or you think they should have regulated it more, or do you? And it's okay if you don't have an opinion. I'm not trying to make you controversial. It's very real for you. It's like a theoretical locker room exercise for me and a bunch of fishing buddies, but you're actually making a living doing this directly impacted by these rules.
Mhm. I I truly think it should stay around, but I think it's on Bassmaster to create a diverse schedule to where that forward-facing sonar won't play in every tournament.
Right.
And I think this year they've done a really good job of that. So I'm really excited to see what this year will bring. We go to a
Yeah.
lot of rivers and tidal fisheries and that sort of thing that, I really don't think it surely won't be one using forward-facing sonar, which I'm really excited about. So I think as a fan, if you like forward facing sonar, you'll get your events, the St. Clairs, the Hartwells, that sort of thing. But
Right.
if you're a person who doesn't really favor that, you also get your events to follow. So
Yeah.
I think, keeping it around and just making a diverse schedule is the answer in my eyes.
Well, and I'm going to make a bold, no, it's not very bold to me at all. I'm going to make a prediction right now. You're going to see talented young anglers win major tournaments this year, regardless of whether forward-facing sonar plays.
Oh, absolutely.
And I'm a mean old guy, but I just don't believe that this is a cheat code or a tool that everyone has the opportunity to put it into play. And I just think people fail to understand how experienced an angler like you is before he ever or a Bo Browning is or any of these guys who fished in high school and at an elite college level. You got 200 tournaments under your belt, man. You're not a
Mhm.
rookie. I
Mhm.
mean, you're going pro now, but um, you have all the pressure to fish in college that a college football player has to keep their scholarship and perform, and you want to win, right?
Right. No,
You I watch as much coverage of these tournaments as I can because I'm fascinated by it. And again, if I learn one thing about boat positioning or a knot or a rigging or a anything, it was worth it for my time. But you see some of these tournaments every year that are really tight, that are a grind, where like one fish catch makes the difference. And then you see the ones where it's like, dude, everybody's hammering them. You better have 30 pounds every day. And some of that's fishery dependent, some of that's time of year dependent as we go through the whole season.
Mhm.
Do you favor or prefer one of those tournaments or another? Or like, would you much rather fish in that like wide open, everybody's going to get at least 24 pounds? Or do you prefer the ones where you got to scratch it out? Or do you just no feeling one way or the other?
No, my style is definitely those grinder type tournaments. The
Yeah.
ones, I really do think my biggest strength is mental toughness over any technique. I think my biggest strength is mental toughness. I don't know why, but I really favor those tournaments. I think I'm pretty good at, keeping my mind, where it needs to be. I'm staying focused, that sort of thing. I think I don't know why it is because I come from a place in Minnesota where you can go out and catch as many fish as you want. But I really I
I
really
like
think
places like that.
yeah, no, I do too. But I don't know. I think the last couple of years here at the Coosa River, there's a lot of tough days on the water, and I think I've really trained myself to have a thought process where I can succeed on those types of fisheries. And over time, they've really become the ones where I really favor those types of fisheries. Um, in a tournament situation, at least, if I'm going fun fishing, I'm just like anyone else. I want to go crack as many
Let's
as I
light them
want.
up. Yeah.
Yeah, right. But I
Yeah.
think in a competitive scenario, I think those grinder type tournaments are the ones I favor for sure.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, you've done very well on them. What's harder to catch? A spooky spotted Tusa spot or a smallmouth in clear water?
They're both can be pesky.
Dude, those spots are something. And again, these weren't Coosa River spots, but my father-in-law, may he rest in peace, had a place on Lake Washita in Arkansas. And it's like one of these real deep, clear lakes. It's got a mix of largemouth and spotted bass, got some big stripers in there. And all he wanted to do was fish topwaters. Like he'd rather catch 3 fish on topwaters than 30 fish, sea rigging a point or something. It made me crazy because I just want to catch fish. But you learn a lot when you force a technique all year round, trying to find spots and find fish and everything. But him and some of these old guys that he fished with, if we got on a spot and started catching a bunch of spotted bass, they'd put them in the live well until we were done in that spot and then let them go. Because as soon as you catch one of those spots and let it go, it would put the school down. And he told me that, and I was like, "You're crazy, man." And I witnessed that multiple times. And I have fly fished for carp and seen where these carp have some way to release a pheromone or some kind of scent that spooks the whole school, you know what I mean? And it just clears the area out. I don't know that we understand how those spotted bass are doing it, but man, they can be, you talk about on and off, and they're biting and they're not. And you think you've got them all figured out, and then you can't buy a bite to save your life. When it's good, it's good. But man, when it's tough, I don't, you're earning your money for sure.
Right. No, that's a real thing what you just said. That I don't know what it is. It's like they have to, you catch one, you release it. They have to go tell their buddies, there's something wrong here. Like, it happens. Something
I don't know
happened.
how they're doing it, but it's happening. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's a lot of the events that myself and Bo, we all fish, it's against the rules to do that. You can't have more than you can do that up to
Sure.
five
Right.
fish.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I've seen that too. It's definitely a real thing, and that leads me to think that a lot of these fish are a lot smarter than we give them credit for.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
they're they know something's up for sure when you start catching them.
Yeah. Especially prime tournament season on Gunnersville or Logan Martin or something. Because they're getting hammered by locals, they're getting hammered by local tournament pressure, and then we got the big national tournaments coming in. But oh man. Well, this is fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for your time. You got all kinds of sponsors for this year. First year on the Elite Series. I can't imagine how excited you are. You guys have your first event coming up like this week
Yeah,
or
I start
next week?
practicing this Sunday, so it's
Oh
coming up
man,
quick.
are you
But no, it's
excited?
been oh, I'm so excited. It's been a dream come true. I get to design my own jersey and truck and boat wrap for my
Oh,
first time.
cool.
I've just been having so much fun doing that, and I'm so
It's
excited.
harder work than I thought it was. Jack has been helping us. We had to wrap our Suburban, and now we've had to get a new trailer that we take to shows. Not a boat trailer, but like an enclosed cargo trailer. We're having to wrap that, and then we're trying to get our boat wrapped. This saltwater boat. It's like the design of this stuff is. There's more skill there than I thought. You don't just slap a bunch of logos on and it looks good, you know?
Right. No,
Yeah.
it's there's a lot that goes into it, but like I said, I've been enjoying it so much, and it's a dream come true really for me.
Well, it's awesome and it's very exciting to watch you fish and I just rooting for you as a Montevallo alum, seeing you go out there and do well. It makes me happy for Steve and Mr. Crawford and or Dr. Crawford and yeah, it's that's good stuff, man. So I'm setting the over under on your wins this year at 4. So just, keep that in mind as you and I'm taking the over. So Jack's taking the under. So do you want to let Jack win? Don't let Jack take my money. Come on.
I'll have to take that personal. Jack's
Yeah.
Jack's
Well, you should just ask to see our fantasy fishing rosters and see who's got more Eastern Fothergill on it, me or him. Okay. I'm not trying to
will
drive a
do.
rift between friends. I'm just trying to talk about who your friends are, right? So no. But man, it's so
Well
awesome
said.
to have you. Thank you for sharing. I know you're it's so interesting to me to be talking to a young guy who's such uh uh, at the forefront of this thing across all the elite anglers in the country and by virtue of this tour the world, right? So wish you the best of luck and just can't wait to see what you do. And you look us up sometimes if you're passing through Alabama and you need to stop and do laundry or something, you know where to find us. Yeah.
Will do, man. No, I appreciate all your support this far, and I can't wait for what lies ahead for sure.
Me too. Any sponsors you want to plug while we've got you here?
Man, I don't think so, really. It's just, it's I think we covered a lot of good stuff this podcast. Hopefully whoever listens will definitely learn something.
Oh, they'll
And
learn something for sure. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Please help me take Jack's money this season. Please help me for once win fantasy fishing on Bassmaster.com. I just need to beat. All I need to beat is I need to beat Jack and I need to beat Jay Kumar. That's all. As long as I beat those two guys, then I'm the world champion in my mind. So that's good enough for me.
Hey, I'll do my best to fulfill all your dreams for sure. I'll
Awesome,
work
man.
my hardest.
Finally, someone is focused on the right things. Yeah, no, well, I'm gonna try to take some of your mental toughness with me the next time I break off a fish or miss a fish. Or as spring rolls around, take a top water away from one because I was too excited. I don't know how I can be getting old and slow and my reflexes are so bad, but I can still manage to take a top water out of a fish's mouth before they can close their mouth on it. Too twitchy. Oh man. Well, hey, good luck with the season. Keep us posted. Looking forward to all your continued success and really appreciate you sharing all those secrets with us. So and appreciate all you guys tuning in, gals tuning in and listening to the Mastering Rod Building podcast. Please like, subscribe, and download wherever you get your podcast content. And we'll see you next time.